What's up, guys? It's Tim here live, the first edition of the Fantasy Buzz with Tim. I got a couple requests in this week with lineups. Going to take a look at a couple lineups and talk about injuries. Talk about a couple waiver wire guys I think could help out your team this week. We'll get right into it with Spencer Jenkins sent me his lineups. He's trying to figure out what to do. He had a rough week last week. So we're looking at it now. Russell Wilson, Green Bay, obviously can't really go wrong there. But it'd be interesting to see Eli Manning against Atlanta. Manning did look too good in week one against Dallas. Dallas defense a lot better than Atlanta. However, Sam Bradford was able to put up some serious points the last couple drives there. And I think Russell Wilson's definitely something to debate. I'd stick with Russell Wilson. We don't know too much about Green Bay yet. Chicago was able to put up a good amount of points against them. And I think Russell Wilson in that offense, pretty good chance. Obviously, he's going to want to keep Lacey in the game. Ivory as well. Ivory had a big game last week. Larry Fitzgerald's a good start to have this week, if any of you have him on the bench. Carson Palmer had a great week last week. Was this number 2 ranked quarterback on ESPN Fantasy Football. So that's definitely a good option. And if Carson Palmer is available in your leagues or on somebody's bench, you might want to pick him up here. They have a good stretch coming at them ahead. He's been on a good hot start. And against Chicago this week, I'd expect Carson Palmer to be in the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks again. We'll move right down the list here. Jason Witten is going to be – so here's his main question for me was Jason Witten, Austin Jefferson. I think you got to stick with Witten here. And that's not anything to do with my obvious Cowboy bias, but Witten with Dez Bryant out is going to see a lot more targets, as you saw the other day on the drives where Dez was out of the game. Witten caught both touchdowns and was a go-to man the entire time. We'll go down Texans defense, Carolina, obviously a pretty strong pick, one of the best defenses in the NFL. I think he's good there. But Golden Tate, questionable against Minnesota. The Minnesota defense was able to hold down San Francisco the other day. San Francisco's not exactly a super defense, or Minnesota, I should say. San Francisco doesn't have a super offense, but didn't put up a lot of points. Golden Tate, questionable. He's got Russell Wilson, there's tension there. We're not going to talk about that. Golden Tate, Calvin Johnson had a bad week last week. I'd expect him to step back up. Golden Tate, especially listed as questionable, won't be 100% on Sunday. I'm going to go with a bench there. So who do we replace Golden Tate with in the flex position? He's got a lot of great options here. Obviously, Safarian Jefferson, 2 touchdowns the other day with Jameis Winston against a New Orleans team defense that's very banged up. Good choice. But I'm going to go with Ronnie Hillman here as his flex. I think that's the guy to slide in, especially with C.J. Anderson questionable. That's a Thursday night game tonight, so if you're going to use the flex, if you're going to use anybody in the Thursday night game, I know I'm pretty tentative to do that because then your scoring is – and you have to wait and play defense for the rest of the weekend. I think Ronnie Hillman's going to get a lot of touches tonight, probably going to have a bunch of catches out of the backfield, going to be able to take on the role of C.J. Anderson, and that's definitely the smart move. And that's it for Spencer's offense, Spencer's fantasy lineup. We're going to move on now to the line. We're back to me, obviously. We're going to go over to Matt Carpenter's lineup. He sent me in his also looking for – we're going to go over some daily fantasy options as well as overall things. All right, we're live here with the Russell Sprouts. This is his bench. So right now he's telling me he has Eric Decker in the flex, and he needs a flex guy to kind of decide if there's anybody as a better option for him. Joique Bell, always pretty consistent in the backfield, but there's been a lot of buzz about Amir Abdullah, and I think Amir Abdullah is going to begin to take over a number 1 role, even though they like Bell out of the backfield. Abdullah is just such a threat, catching the ball, running the ball, kick returning, that he could be susceptible to injury down the road, but I don't think Joique Bell is a good pick this week. Devontae Adams was a guy who was picked to have a breakout season this year. Week 1 didn't do very much with Cobb back, is taking the number 1 role, and some good action from the tight ends in Green Bay. Not necessarily. It really depends here on your type of league. If it's a PPR league, Doug Martin's going to be a good option against a really banged up New Orleans secondary, New Orleans defensive core as a whole. But I think that Tampa Bay is going to have some trouble throwing the football, going to have to rely on Martin with Jameis Winston's only his second game. Something I would have liked to see them do more of last week is just lean on the run and give Jameis an opportunity to settle down. Yeldon, another good look. Miami, Jordan Cameron, TJ Yeldon are pretty similar here. I think Jordan Cameron against Jacksonville is definitely a tasty option for Matt here. Cameron, Jacksonville, obviously one of the lower tier teams in the NFL, didn't have the advantage of having a first-round pick this year because Dante Fowler out for the year. So the defense is still not strong. They are very prone to turnovers on offense. Bortles is known to throw a lot of picks, and they have a lot of inexperienced guys. So I would say for your flex here, Matt, you got to go with Jordan Cameron or Doug Martin. If it's a PPR league, I think you go Doug Martin. If not, and you're looking for a flex guy who can make a big splash opposed to Doug Martin will get you 10 points or so, Jordan Cameron can go anywhere from 5 points to 20 points if he gets a couple touches. Deion Sims was hurt last week for Miami. He left the game. I don't know what his status for the week is, but definitely looked as soon as he went out, Jordan Cameron's role increased. They had a bunch of nice catches down the field. I think Jordan Cameron should be your flex this week over Eric Decker with your week 2 suggestion. So that's it for the lineups today. We'll come back over to me, and we're back. So now we're going to talk a little daily fantasy. This week for daily fantasy, I'll bring you over. Read out who I have for daily fantasy this week. Not going to tell you where I have daily fantasy this week. Not giving anybody any free endorsements, but a guy who might be on the trade block in a couple leagues, Drew Brees, is going to be a absolutely unstoppable, a great pick, a surefire pick for daily fantasy this week. Guy you can get at a pretty decent price because he's not one of the top tier quarterbacks, but he puts up a lot of points. He might even be near the top of the salary cap list for a bunch of dailies because he's Drew Brees, So, and they're playing Tampa Bay, which is why you're really looking at that kind of deal. Going down the line, I have Drew Brees, Matt Forte, Carlos Hyde, Antonio Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, Terrence Williams. Definitely a guy you want to look at this week in the flex position or the third wide receiver position. He, with Dez Bryant out, you got to figure he's going to have a big day, as well as Witten and all those guys. But Terrence Williams had a couple nice plays the other day. I think he put up 8 points or so last week. Had 2 key drops on first downs that he probably could have stretched out. He's a guy who can catch the ball at the line of scrimmage on a slant and take it to the house every time. And against the Eagles defense that was pretty shaky last week against Julio Jones, who's one of the best receivers in the league, the Cowboys are at a disadvantage without Dez. And I think if they're going to try to stretch the field, they're going to use Terrence Williams to do that with maybe a little Gavin Escobar as well. But I wouldn't take Escobar quite yet in fantasy. In daily, he'll be a really cheap option for tight ends. But with Witten in there, I don't think you want to take that chance at getting maybe a flop game. He had a touchdown last week, but he only had 3 or 4 catches. They looked at him a lot. I think going forward for a couple cheap options here, Terrence Williams definitely a cheap option. Tyler Eifert won't be in that top tier of tight ends, but he's definitely going to give you a chance here. He had 34 points on daily last week. Tore up the Raiders. He's a big dude, 6'6", great hands, out last year with the broken arm. Tyler Eifert's a guy in daily or in your league. If you can get your hands on him, you're going to want to keep him around. Definitely can give you a big play spark, kind of Gronk-like tight end output with a lot more touchdowns rather than catches, like a guy like Witten is going to get you a lot of receptions. Eifert more a guy like Gronk or Gates who's going to get you a bunch more touchdowns. In the flex, I got Tavon Austin playing Washington, who was pretty not bad on defense last week. They only let up 10 defensive points because of one of the touchdowns in the 17-10 loss was a punt return. But Tavon Austin will plan to play the role that Jarvis Landry had. Jarvis Landry had a pretty good week last week, and Tavon Austin has an opportunity to get the ball in a lot of different ways. Last week, the Rams ran it with him a couple times. He had a touchdown. He had a punt return touchdown. That won't count here, but I think you're really looking at a pretty solid scenario. And then for defense, I have the Miami Dolphins defense. They're a tough D. They held Washington down last week, which isn't isn't crazy for Kirk Cousins, but they got a guy, Blake Bortles, who loves to throw pick sixes. And you can get a pick six, that's a pretty big fantasy. Dolphins with some good cornerbacks. They got Grimes, and name is slipping me now. The guy made a great play the other day to clinch that game with that defensive line and some inexperienced running backs in Yeldon. I think you have a really good chance at the Dolphins putting up a high defensive number this week. So we'll go quickly to – I'm going to go over the waiver wire. I'm going to look at the waiver wire in my league. I'm going to go through guys that might be available for you if you're trying to make a late submission, you got an injury or something like that. We'll see what we can do. Guys I like so far, guys who had a surprise week probably stole some points for you. If you were a Joseph Randle owner, you probably had some issues because Lance Dunbar was the running back on the field the most for the Cowboys. Cowboys running backs as a whole are kind of a dangerous pick, mostly because they change so much. They have so many different ways they can get you that you got to be a little bit concerned about if you have Joseph Randle, who's going to be carrying the ball at the goal line. All right, right now, we'll take a look at guys that are available. The Panthers defense is available in my league. I can't imagine it's available in a lot of leagues. With Luke Kuechly down, they're owned in 67% of the leagues and on ESPN. So the Panthers defense with Kuechly down, if they're available, I think that might be a chance. If you're one of the 33% that has them available, it might be worth a shot for you to go pick them up. But look down. Nick Foles is an interesting option here. Great game against Seattle. Seattle did not have Chancellor last week, but Foles is the kind of guy that you could pick up when they play a bad team. They have Washington this week. So if you're kind of in the middle tier quarterbacks, I think taking a shot on Nick Foles this week, picking him up, he's only owned in 16% of ESPN leagues. He's healthy. He's coming off a very good game, confidence-building game. And then they have a game against Pittsburgh, pretty good D. They got torn up. Actually, Pittsburgh secondary might be another time you want to have Foles. So they have a pretty good offense. Then you got Arizona, Green Bay, a bye, Cleveland. So maybe you pick him up for this week and next week and drop him back off in the waiver tank. But we'll look through again. The Titans defense, playing Johnny Manziel this week, or McCown, whoever it is. The Browns love to turn the ball over, and the Titans defense, they're not great. However, with Marcus Mariota playing last week, this team had 18 points against Jameis Winston, only allowed 14 points. They had 2 interceptions, one of which was a pick six. So there's definitely big playability on the Titans defense. And playing Cleveland, I think that'd be a pretty good bid if you're in a little bit of a defensive bind this week. Go back over. We'll do 2 or 3 more. We're going to go Josh Brown. Here's an interesting thing. I think Josh Brown, if you're having a kicker issue, is a pretty good pick for this week. The Giants kicker, Josh Brown. He made his kicks. I think he had 3 field goals the other day. He made all 3, didn't miss one. Had put up 17 points last. Oh, he made 4 field goals last week against Dallas because the Giants had a little bit of trouble getting the ball. They had a lot of turnovers on D, couldn't really get the ball into the end zone as well as they would have liked. 4 field goals, that's 12. That's 17 points with the 2 extra points. So he definitely has the capability to make some long kicks. And against Atlanta and Washington the next 2 weeks, it's going to be opportunities to score. The Eagles, they make that kick the other day. They probably win that game. So thank you. Tough day. Dunbar is a good flex option I was talking about earlier. Dangerous for the Cowboys to pick a Cowboys offensive player. But Lance Dunbar at a 12.1 ownership rate might be a good pick here. It's be Philadelphia. You don't really know what to expect from the Cowboys offense this week. So maybe you pick him up, throw him on the bench, and see what happens. David Johnson. Here's my waiver wire steal of the week. For owning only half ESPN leagues, he had 0 rushing attempts. Interesting. He had 0 rushing attempts last week, but Andre Ellington is out. He's going to give you an option. The dude is fast. He had a great game, a couple big plays the other day. With Ellington out, they're going to use him as a horse because Chris Johnson might be a good pickup too. But I think David Johnson, I'd expect him to get a lot of carries. Ryan Mallett, owning 1.4% of leagues, has been rumored to be named the Houston Texans starting quarterback here. Had a great Got to hydrate, Had a great second half. Threw a touchdown the other day against Kansas City's pretty good D. Going up against Carolina and Tampa Bay in the next 2 weeks. Mallett might be a guy you want to keep on the bench right now to get that Tampa Bay, especially if it's the end of the waiver transit, because he could put up a good game on Sunday and be snatched right out from under you. And they play in a division where they're the best defense. There's not a lot of good defenses around them. And I'll just read you guys off my my lineup for this week, kind of what I'm going with. I'm going with Carson Palmer. Guys that I all think are going to have a big week. Carson Palmer, DeMarco Murray against Cowboys. It kills me, but I think he's going to have a pretty good game. I could afford a fumble or two. But Tevin Coleman looked pretty good last week. This week playing the Giants, kind of be able to have a good chance to run around. I'm hoping for a bounce-back week from Calvin Johnson. Julian Edelman, hopefully be steady as ever. He had a great game last week, put up a lot of fantasy points. Martellus Bennett, Terrence Williams I was talking about. Ravens defense. If Ravens defense is up for auction, they're owned in 87% of leagues. But if they're up for auctions, I've kind of developed a decision that I'm going to try to find a defense that's playing Oakland, Jacksonville, or Tampa Bay. Obviously, I don't want to take the chance with the New Orleans defense because they're hurt. I picked up the Ravens defense off the waiver wire the other day. But they're owned in a lot of leagues. You probably won't have a chance to get your hands on them. But definitely as a strategy going forward, look for a team like Oakland who likes to turn the ball over, doesn't put up a lot of points. Jacksonville is definitely a team that you want to try to get. So I think that Tennessee defense is probably a good pick against Jacksonville this week. I got Peyton Manning on the bench. Bad week last week. If you have Peyton Manning, I don't know if it's time to worry yet. The other guys on the site want to crucify him, but I think he's got a little bit left in the tank. He could have a couple big games against some bad teams. And I'm benching the Seahawks defense this week. If you're a Seahawks defense owner, I'd beware of Green Bay. They're pretty, Green Bay is a great offense. Even with Jordy Nelson out, they still get the best quarterback in the NFL. I'm going to get crucified by the Patriot guys for that, but Aaron Rodgers didn't look great last week. But I would expect him to bounce back week. And another guy that isn't owned in a lot of leagues, I'll go back to this guy I had picked up my bench, Richard Rodgers. For all the local guys, he's a St. John Shrewsbury product. Went to Cal, played a little safety, and move over tight end. Rodgers likes him. He had 3 catches for 27 yards last week, but he had a touchdown in the playoff game against Dallas last year. He's a big red zone target, and he could get a random touchdown every once in a while. However, playing Seahawks defense might be cautious to do that. That's it for this week. I hope I kept it short enough for you guys to watch all the way through. If not, I appreciate you popping in for a little bit. Have a good one. Hopefully I can help you out, win some games, win some money this weekend. And if not, let me know. If so, feel free to give me a little shout out online. And hopefully I can get a lot more questions next week, have a little bit more lineups to deal with. All right, thanks a lot. Peace.